Hi class, this is my week 4 video upload. I wanted to talk about two of the readings. First, the reading by Easton et al. About the implications for smoking cessation among same-sex and both-sex attractions. I thought the class discussion that we're having on Blackboard was really insightful because I think there's so many factors that might perpetuate this sort of reality that same-sex individuals are at higher risk for smoking, among many other things. And I thought it was really interesting that we sort of began to talk about women and how women are sort of quote doubly affected by this because living in a society that's full of patriarchy and sexism and discrimination, whether it's in the workplace, in the home, in educational settings, whatever. I think, in addition to, of course, our LGBTQ friends, women are at high risk of engaging in some of these risky behaviors because they also fall victim to these sorts of systems of oppression. I really think that Easton was getting at something very important when they were talking about how certain risk factors may lead to folks to smoke. So one of the things that really stuck out to me that sort of relates to these concepts was self-esteem, in that in a world where many are discriminated against or legal protections fail to exist for, folks like transgender folks and women, it makes a lot of sense that these sorts of intersectional systems of oppression lead many to smoke. And I think it's very important that we sort of take into consideration intersectionality and how racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, some of these sorts of notions all sort of lead to many feeling low self-esteem, feeling discriminated against, feeling insecure. And as one who is still trying to quit smoking, that feeling of security is very rewarding, and cigarettes have a way of making people feel secure. One of the best sort of analogies that I ever heard when I took a smoking cessation class a few years ago was that cigarettes are like our best friend, and giving up cigarettes is like giving up our best friend. So the idea is that cigarettes are always there for us. They're there for us when we're happy, when we're sad, when we're accomplished, when we're bored. They're there when we feel discriminated against. They're there when we feel supported. They're there when we're high or when we're drunk. And so giving up cigarettes is like giving up, the best friend who is always there for you, no matter what your emotional output may be. And I think this sorts of relates to the second article I wanted to talk about, which was the Burkhalter article on the intention to quit smoking among lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender folks. That word intention is very important here because a lot of our smoking cessation interventions try to focus on, what's the intent to quit smoking? What's the reason that we want to quit smoking? And, some of the obvious reasons, of course, are, we want to live healthier lives. We want to have better health outcomes. We want to save money, this, that, and the other thing. And I think Burkhalter makes a really important point by bringing out the theory of planned behavior, in that, a lot of our attitudes and behaviors towards smoking are so ingrained in us that if we were to focus, as Kurt said in his post, if we were to focus on that intent to quit smoking, if we were to focus on being able to identify when people want to quit smoking, I think is a very important first step, because, interventions and drug treatment programs, there's a lot of resources and time that are sort of not wasted, but for lack of a better word, wasted when we try to help folks quit smoking when they don't even want to quit smoking. If someone doesn't want to quit smoking, or they haven't had that sort of attitude change in that, I want to quit smoking, now I need help smoking, smoking cessation is not going to work. I mean, anyone who smokes, for the most part, is also aware that smoking is bad for them. And I think, us as public health and other health professionals need to acknowledge that people aren't as oblivious to the fact that smoking is bad for us. We all know it. The research has been there for almost a century now. And so I think focusing on that intent will sort of tie into this theory of planned behavior, in that we can focus on that best friend analogy. We can focus on, our safety plan when we're starting to feel sad or stressed, in that, how can we not resort to our best friend of cigarettes? And so I think, as studies continue to move along, we really need to focus on this intent, while also keeping in mind intersectionality, and how modern day sexism and patriarchal institutions, and of course transphobia, and the lack of legal protections for gender identity, sexual orientation in housing, transportation, employment, education. These are sorts of things that we need to take into account if we're going to continue the work of smoking cessation. There's this quote, I can't for sure say the quote, but it's by Judy Herman, who is one of the leaders of trauma research. And she said that in order for us to effectively study trauma and sort of move along the research of trauma, we need to take into account social movements. And so, to sort of parallel to our class, Judy Herman mentioned the women's rights movement, and how trauma research sort of had a few rounds of being very much in the focus of research, and then sort of getting, swept under the rug. And so, of course, one of the classic examples of trauma research and sort of the rise of trauma research was the Vietnam War, and how vets would come back and show signs of PTSD. So it's similar to sort of this notion of trauma research kind of shifted when the women's liberation movement really took a stance against, domestic abuse, sexual violence. And, Judy Herman's point was that we need to acknowledge these social movements and how they sort of light the fire in initiating research. And so, to bring it back to our class, smoking is something that's bad, and it's bad for your health, and we all know it. It's really rare if you're going to find someone who doesn't acknowledge that or agree with that. And so we need to take into account these social movements, the queer liberation movement, the civil rights movement, and acknowledge that, folks who are marginalized or face extreme discrimination in everyday life are more prone to smoke. So future interventions, future movements are going to have to acknowledge this intersectional nature to discrimination and oppression. And in order for us to be successful in getting folks to quit smoking, or at least educating folks in a way so they can make their own decisions to quit smoking, we do need to take into account these social movements and these implications of identity, and how sexual and gender minorities, as well as people who identify as female, experience great discrimination compared to our male counterparts. So I think, Easton and Burkhalter were both articles that spoke to me, because I do a lot of research in trauma, and a lot of the trauma research has been perpetuated by strong social movements. And I think it's very similar to, this idea of smoking cessation and not stigmatizing or criminalizing substance use. So I just wanted to do an upload again. Hope you all have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.